On this play, Kaprizov picks up the puck in the neutral zone with a full head of steam. At this point, Mike Anderson would then notice that he has two guys back and makes a smart play to aggressively pinch Kaprizov. And pause it right here. At this point, Kaprizov pulls the puck to his forehand with his head up looking for a potential passing lane. However, this entire time, he was just waiting for Anderson to shift his hips, where he now has the upper hand and all the momentum to power past him.
Kaprizov around, scores!
Kirill Kaprizov has an astounding ability to consistently create high-danger scoring chances off of nothing plays, as his ability to read the defenseman and make subtle fakes, waiting for the perfect time to strike is a masterclass of hockey IQ. On this next play, Kaprizov with some speed up the left side gains the offensive zone. Except, there's a problem here, as the Blues have three guys back, so even though he does have some space here, he is at a disadvantage, as most players at this point are going to hold on to the puck and go deep into the zone, looking for a potential passing lane, or they throw a Hail Mary on net. Except, when he loads up for the shot, he wasn't planning on actually shooting here. He was instead trying to catch Torrey Krug flat-footed, where
Kaprizov around, Krug, he scores! Kaprizov beats Krug to the outside, Binnington to the short side, and it's 2-0 Minnesota.
As Kaprizov has been a fascinating talent in today's league. The man is a pure sniper. However, he doesn't score goals like an Alex Ovechkin. No! He instead thrives by playmaking first, creating space for his teammates, where he then finds an open hole for a wide open shot. As he's very unique, as he's essentially a playmaker who orchestrates the entire offense, just waiting for his teammates to get the puck back to him when he's ready. And because of this, Kaprizov has quickly developed into a top player in the league. Doing so while not having a Draisaitl, Reinhart, Nylander, Marner on his line, as Kaprizov has not only been phenomenal, no, he has single-handedly carried the Minnesota Wild back to relevancy. But then, the news would break. Kaprizov would just turn down what would have been the biggest contract in NHL history. That is an 8-year, $16 million per year contract with a total value of $128 million. For us Canadians, that's just shy of $180 million over the next 8 years. So it then begs the question, why? Why would Kaprizov turn down the biggest deal in league history? Has the man lost his mind? Does he want out of Minnesota? And well, after digging into the story, I would discover something shocking. I would make several videos discussing how this upcoming CBA negotiation was going to drastically change the landscape of the entire NHL, whether it was the playoff salary cap, a significant cap increase, or the fact that the max contract term is going to be lowered from 8 to eventually 6 years, as these tweaks are going to inevitably change so many aspects about hockey. Think about the optics here. Not even too long ago, Nathan MacKinnon would sign for $12.6 million per season, and many fans thought, damn, that's a massive deal. It is deserved, but my god, that's a lot of money. Whereas, we are now in a reality where this is going to look like highway robbery in a couple years. And the same thing goes for guys like Pasternak or Leon Draisaitl, proven players if not MVPs signed on great contracts. Therefore, if Kaprizov is already being offered $16 million per season in year one of the new cap era, what in the hell would a player like McKinnon or McDavid command? 18 million? 20 million? As this might sound absurd, and it is, but this is a very likely reality of this salary cap increase. And because of this, we've seen a lot of tension, as there are many players who would have typically signed an extension who haven't. And we're not just talking about average players here. We're talking about some of the top stars in the game. Connor McDavid, Kaprizov, Quinn Hughes, Luke Hughes, Marco Rossi, and Connor Bedard. So many players who haven't signed their ticket, which begs the question, why? For starters, in the past, if a star player was going to go to free agency, it was extremely rare that this player would receive more money on the open market compared to signing a big extension with their team. And if they did sign a bigger deal on the open market, it was due to a bizarre circumstance, or that team only had cap space because they were at the bottom of the standings. And if a player was going to leave their team, there's little to no chance that they're signing with a team who's at the bottom of the league. Therefore, all these guys would be signed now. Do you get what I'm saying here? With this upcoming CBA, this is where everything changes. Instead of just bottom feeders having the cap space available because they don't have a top star on their team, this influx of cash in the salary cap is going to lead to numerous contending teams having cash to spend on massive free agency signings. And we're not talking about a guy like Nick Ehlers, for example. We're talking about nearly guaranteeing a franchise-altering player. Think about the Detroit Red Wings, as I wish I brought this angle up for the last video, but it doesn't matter, because as it stands, they currently have around $12 million in cap space. They have their entire core locked up for the long term aside from DeBrincat, meaning that by next season, and I'm not even joking, with some of their expiring veteran contracts, they have a projected $44.4 million worth of cap space. I'll say it again, $44.4 million. When have we ever seen anything like this before? We are in an unprecedented timeline, where for the teams who played it smart in terms of roster construction and contracts, are gonna have never before seen money to spend in free agency. And because of this, the next 3 to 5 years of free agency should be absolute chaos. Which then begs the question, for a team like Minnesota, Vancouver, dare I say Edmonton, if their franchise player doesn't sign during the season, and it's creeping up to the trade deadline, how in the hell do you not feel like you have to trade that player? Think about the Vancouver Canucks. If they don't make the playoffs this season, knowing that more teams will have cap space in the offseason, how do they not orchestrate a blockbuster deal? As the Canucks could retool their entire roster with a Quinn Hughes deal. Now, of course, the priority is to sign the man, but if they don't make the playoffs, I don't know how they don't trade him. Whereas a team like Edmonton has been to 2 Stanley Cup finals in a row, they are still hands down top contenders in the league, and if they get to that deadline without a McDavid extension, you could still argue that they'd be better to keep him, even if he walks in free agency, because it might just end with a cup. But at the same time, if they don't win a cup, how do you ignore what will be the biggest trade package in NHL history if McDavid is traded? Because on this graphic, we have 13 of the biggest free agency signings in league history. Zdeno Chara, Scott Stevens, Niedermayer, Dominic Hasek, more recently guys like Tavares and Panarin. So we're not just talking about good players here, we're talking about all-timers. As these players were not traded, they would walk to free agency, leaving a massive hole in the team they departed from. Okay, so then I thought, how many playoff rounds would these players win with their new team compared to their old team in the same time frame? And to further clarify, let's use Tavares as an example. Since joining Toronto, the Leafs have won a grand total of 2 playoff rounds. However, the New York Islanders after Tavares left up until today have ironically won 6 playoff rounds, which is honestly mind-blowing. Yet, Tavares is the only example to where a franchise player leaving somehow results in more playoff rounds for the old team. Classic Toronto, honestly, because out of the 13 players, they would win a grand total of 58 playoff rounds, whereas the old teams would win a grand total of 23 playoff rounds, meaning that the players who left would on average win double the playoff rounds compared to their old teams. But it doesn't stop there, it gets much crazier. Of those 13 players and teams and a grand total of 71 playoff rounds, the players who walked to free agency, and I'm not even joking, would win a combined 13 Stanley Cups. In fact, the only players who haven't won a cup with their new teams are Tavares and Panarin, because here's where it gets crazier. Yeah, the team letting a star walk to free agency will hurt, but at the same time, they will now have additional money to spend on players, which in some cases can help build depth, leading to a more well-rounded team. However, those teams would win 0 Stanley Cups. None. 13-0, which goes to show how when a Hall of Famer leaves in their prime, it can lead to devastating results for their original squad. But okay, let's not look into the numbers where teams instead traded those star players. Keep in mind, yes, if Edmonton had to trade McDavid, the other team is the automatic winner here, but at the same time, it also means that they are giving up major pieces to acquire him. So you would think that the results may not be as drastic as obtaining these players from free agency. And what's interesting here is while I was compiling this list, I would notice that there's been many league-altering trades throughout NHL history. However, these trades were far more common before the introduction of the salary cap, which just goes to show how when teams have more money to spend every offseason, it can lead to superstars being reluctant to sign with their team. Because on this graphic, we have 13 of the biggest trades in league history. Mark Messier, Gretzky, Sundin, Patrick Waugh. More recently, we have Kachuk, Erik Karlsson, Hot Dog Man, Phil Kessel. And well, these players on their new teams would win a grand total of 98 playoff rounds, and their old teams would win 82, so not nearly the difference of players walking to free agency, but they still would win more. However, these players on their new teams would win 6 Stanley Cups, and their old teams would win 9. So even though these teams would trade some of the greatest players in league history, they would on average win more Stanley Cups, which kind of proves my theory here. When you lose a player for nothing in free agency, even though now you have the cap space to try to fill in those gaps, it has without a doubt favored the team who acquired that star for free. But when a team has the ability to instead trade that star and get a massive return to fill in all their gaps, they've had far more success when it comes to winning cups, which is pretty crazy here. So it then begs the question, for teams who have a star who hasn't resigned, do they go all in for one last season, or do they orchestrate that blockbuster deal? A big shout out to SeatGeek for sponsoring today's video. Check them out down below. I'd really appreciate a like on this video, and as always, thanks for watching.